This is Rank the World, where I'm going to rank everything on this planet, no matter how long it takes me. Spanning over 30 seasons, 700 episodes, and 3.5 decades, The Simpsons is a staple of American television. And with such longevity came the merch, ranging from albums to movies to comic books and, of course, video games. With almost as many games as there are seasons, there are bound to be some winners here, but also probably a few stinkers. So I've taken it upon myself to play every single home console and handheld release out there to find out which of these games are worthy of being tied to such a beloved and long-running franchise. Some of these I played as a kid and some I'd never even heard of before, but I played through all of them to find the best that Springfield has to offer. As always, this is just my personal opinion, so don't have a cow man. But let me know in the comments if you agree or disagree. And if you have something you want me to rank next, let me know. Also, I'll only be counting games that released on either home consoles or handhelds, so no mobile games and none of the PC games. Alright, we've got our tier list here ready to go. We've got our categories: S for Stupid Sexy Video Game, A for CARAMBA, this is a fun game, B for Blurst of Times, C for Cowabunga but Sad, and D is just straight up dough. I've got these set in chronological order here, so starting off first, we have the Simpsons arcade game. And I know I just said that this was, the home releases only, but this technically counts since it was ported to the Commodore 64 and later to the 360 and the PS3, so it counts. I loved this game as a kid. We had an arcade in my town growing up, and I'd either be on this or the X-Men arcade game or some combo of the two the entire time I was there. That being said, going back to it now, I didn't love it as much as I used to. For anyone who hasn't played, this is like a side-scroller beat-em-up style classic arcade game. You get to play as Homer, Marge, Bart, or Lisa on a quest to save Maggie. But once the novelty of playing as these characters and beating up enemies wears off, you're just kind of doing the same thing over and over for the entirety of the game. It's honestly pretty repetitive, but that can be said for most arcade games in this style. I will say the animations and the graphics are really good for their time, and it's definitely a lot more fun if you're playing multiplayer rather than by yourself. This game is a beat 'em up, and it knows that, and it does it well. So I think I'm gonna put this at A. This is like a fun one to throw on for a few minutes, but I think we can do better. And next up we have Bart versus the Space Mutants. And this is not better. This is Bart's first foray into his own video games, releasing on the Game Gear, the Genesis, Master System, and the NES. The plotline is basically Bart stumbles upon space mutants who are trying to take over the planet. So the goal is to stop them from taking purple items for their machine. So you have to make things not purple while avoiding the aliens. Yeah, honestly, this game is annoying as hell. I didn't play this as a kid, so it's not nostalgic for me at all. It was just upsetting. I played the first level like 20 times before finally giving up and looking up a walkthrough. The biggest downside is definitely the lack of information. Without like walkthroughs like I used, I don't know how anyone would have beaten this game back when it was released. I still don't think I figured out how to do half the stuff I was supposed to, and after like 10 more tries with the walkthrough, I gave up. But from my playthrough, I'd probably throw this on C. Next up, we've got Escape from Camp Deadly. So this is the first handheld Simpsons game exclusively on the Game Boy. The game starts out with Bart and Lisa being welcomed to camp, not very nicely, by an Iron Fist Burns. And I don't know if this is supposed to be Mr. Burns or just like somebody related to him. I don't know why Mr. Burns would be a camp counselor. I'm not sure. It just sort of throws you straight into your first morning activity of capture the flag. And honestly, I think this game was even more infuriating than Space Mutants. I got a little bit farther in this than I did in that, but it was definitely a chore. It's another side-scrolling platformer, which I usually enjoy, but I'm not sure if it was the slow controls, the enemies popping in with only maybe a second to react, or not having any info to go off of, but this game is pretty challenging. The platforming itself isn't too bad, but it's just everything around it. Not only that, but the graphics are pretty awful, even for a Game Boy game, and the soundtrack is literally just an 8-bit version of the Simpsons theme on repeat. I don't think I'm gonna be touching this one again. I'm gonna throw this on D. Alright, next up we have Bart versus the World, which you're gonna notice Bart is a bit of a recurring theme in these games, because this was during the height of the Bart mania that was going on in the 90s. This game's kind of weird. It's like part side-scrolling platformer like the other two releases, but also part minigame collection. The minigames are alright. In the first level, you've got like a card matching game, a sliding puzzle, and some trivia. The trivia is pretty straightforward stuff that most fans would probably be able to get. The card matching game is easy enough if you're alright at that kind of stuff. The sliding puzzle is a little tedious, but I grew up playing Pokemon, so that's nothing new. The platform section, though, is appropriately titled Junk, and it is exactly that. You know, it's simple enough: avoid enemies, collect items, but it's still a pretty boring yet inoffensive platformer. There's nothing really too special about it, and the controls kind of suck at times. And yet again, the soundtrack is literally just the 8-bit Simpsons theme on repeat. They're getting a lot of mileage out of this track. The storyline is a bit more plausible than the Space Mutants game. You know, instead of fighting aliens, you're trying to foil Mr. Burns. And I do think that the minigames sort of help this from feeling too stale. So I'm going to throw this with Space Mutants on C. All right, Krusty's Funhouse. This one was released on the NES, SNES, Game Boy, Game Gear, Genesis, and the Master System, but I'm going to be checking out the Game Boy version. This time the game's focusing on one of the most popular side characters, Krusty the Clown, and oh my god, what is that? That's terrifying. Like most of these games, this sort of tosses you in with no explanation of what to do. You're Krusty and you're trying to get rid of a mice infestation. I don't know if I'd call that a fun house per se, but hey, what do I know? That being said, even though it's a pretty simple concept, this is actually a decent puzzle platformer. It's got some challenging moments the further along you get, sort of like the rest of these games, but I don't think it's going to piss people off as much. You know, I actually think I kind of enjoyed this game. I like puzzle games like this and can see myself picking this one back up if I get bored. So I'm going to toss this on B. All right, Bart versus the Juggernauts. So this is another Game Boy exclusive. This time you play as Bart as he competes in a game show against the titular Juggernauts, which is a group of hulking individuals. It's basically like American Gladiators, but you're a child competing against adults. I'd watch that show. The minigames, in true Simpsons game fashion, are a bit difficult until you get the hang of them. The skateboard one at the beginning might be the first time I've beaten one of these levels on my first go through, but it kind of lulls you into like a false sense of security because this game definitely gets more difficult as you move on. And if you lose all your lives, you have to start over from the very beginning. The graphics and the sound aren't going to get too annoying when playing, and it's got most of the characters in the show as part of the game, which is nice. Overall, this game is pretty inoffensive, you know? It's a good time killer, it's a fun little game, but nothing special. So I'm going to throw this one on B. All right, Bart's Nightmare. So we're back to home consoles now, this time on the SNES and the Genesis. The story here is pretty simple. Bart falls asleep, loses his homework in a dream, and has to go through a bunch of minigames to collect the pages. So right off the bat, this is probably the best looking of the early 90s Simpsons games. There's also more than one music track, which was a really nice touch at this point. The cons of this game: basically everything else. The main part of the game is you walking up and down a street looking for pages to jump into and avoiding enemies and obstacles. It's not difficult by any means, but it's pretty boring and tedious. And then the other part of this game is the mini games, which span from easy and boring like the Germ game to stupid and difficult like the Indiana Jones style one. It's fun at first seeing all of Bart's dreams and nightmares come to life, but that wears off pretty quickly and leaves you with a sort of boring and annoying game. This game didn't piss me off like some of the others here, but it's not one I'd ever see myself wanting to jump back into. So we're gonna throw this one on C with the other two home console games. All right, Bartman meets Radioactive Man, another Bart adventure, this time on the NES and the Game Gear, and what the hell was that? I hated that so much. So Bart's in his treehouse reading a Radioactive Man comic, sees he's in trouble, and Fall Out Boy, his sidekick, comes to Bart himself to help him save Radioactive Man. This is another platform where you avoid enemies and obstacles and gain some superpowers along the way. However, it seems Acclaim sort of learned nothing while making the first couple of games, since this uses basically the same terrible controls as the other titles. That being said though, it is a bit more forgiving. It hands out extra lives here and there, which you will need. The game also does have some levels that change things up. There's like an auto shooter and a maze level. I don't think this game is necessarily good, but I do think it's better than the other home releases. So this one is going above them on B. Bart and the Beanstalk. So this is another handheld game for the Game Boy. It's Jack and the Beanstalk, but you know, with Bart. This is actually such a strange idea for a video game. Why did they do this? Also, this frame of Homer eating the beans is S tier by itself. The game though is terrible. These games are making me not like The Simpsons anymore at this point. It's got the same issues as Escape from Camp Deadly, where you basically have to memorize where the enemies are because they pop up too suddenly for you to actually kill before they hit you. The controls are shoddy as hell. It feels like you're floating around the level for most of it, with Bart continuing to move after you've stopped pushing the buttons. The graphics here are pretty bad even for an original Game Boy game, and this game is only like 4 levels long, so you can either torture yourself with it for like 20 minutes or do something more productive and probably more fun, like go wash dishes. This is going on D. Alright, Virtual Bart. This is pretty much just a minigame collection released on the SNES and the Genesis. Bart's at a science fair and he gets into a virtual reality machine where he must play through 6 minigames without losing all of his lives or he'll be trapped there forever. The minigames range from practically unbeatable like the water slide level to actually kind of fun, like the one where you're throwing eggs and tomatoes at your classmates. But this game was really hit or miss. Some of the levels I found really fun and some of them frustrated me enough to never want to play them again. So I'm gonna give this a middle of the road score and throw this on B. Alright, Itchy and Scratchy and Mini Golf Madness. So for a game about side characters to a side character, this turned out to be an absolute blast. I actually really enjoyed this game. It sort of mashes together a mini golf game with a platformer and it somehow works. I grew up on platformers, so I do usually enjoy them unless they're, terrible like most of these games here. And I love golf games as well. Hit me with some Mario Golf or Wii Sports. I used to sink hours into golf with friends, even though I don't have any. In this game, you play as Scratchy, the cat, trying to play an average game of mini golf while avoiding the countless Itchies who are, in true Itchy and Scratchy show fashion, trying to murder you. You can pick up weapons to try to fend them off while you putt, or you can jump over them and try to avoid them. The levels are all pretty well designed and they're all themed, which keeps it interesting. There's a few times you might lose your ball in the wackiness, but it's not on a timer or anything, so you have plenty of time to go find it. The controls aren't bad at all, and it has a little bit of a learning curve, but once you get it, this game actually turns out to be a lot of fun. I'm gonna throw this one on A. Now the Itchy and Scratchy game. Finally, some good graphics. How is this game and Bart's Nightmare on the same console? I love retro games, but seeing the deformed sprite of Bart Simpson over and over, I was starting to feel bad for the kid. So apparently around this time, Acclaim was just in, an Itchy and Scratchy mood. This time you play as Itchy, the not a cat, in a straight up action platformer where your goal is pretty much killing Scratchy and not dying. You get a variety of weapons each level, and at the end of every level, you get a boss to defeat. This game's rather short, boasting only 7 levels, but it's a decently fun time while it lasts, and it looks great. I'm gonna throw this one on B. Alright, moving on from the Game Boy to the Game Boy Color, we've got Night of the Living Treehouse of Horror, which is definitely a title. This game is decent. It wasn't the most fun experience, but it didn't make me want to stop playing these games like a couple on the list. It's based on the Treehouse of Horror episodes, with each level taking inspiration from events in the show. Most of the levels take on the task of going through doors and finding things while avoiding enemies, while a few other ideas here and there, like Marge versus the zombies, or there's a King Homer level where it's pretty much Rampage. There's some fun ideas here, but the execution just isn't pulled off very well. This is a very middle of the road game. It didn't leave me too frustrated, but I didn't really find myself enjoying it that much either. I was a little underwhelmed with it, so I'm going to be throwing this one on C. Alright, next up we've got the Simpsons Wrestling on PlayStation. I was a little nervous going into this one because I've seen a lot of hate for it online, but I actually kind of enjoyed it. It's your run-of-the-mill character fighting game. You start off with 8 characters and have to unlock the rest through gameplay. Game-wise, it's pretty much a button masher. You get the opposing character's health down and pin them, like wrestling. The graphics are alright, it's a PlayStation 1 game, so it's not going to look amazing, but for the time, I don't think it looked terrible. There's nothing too special about this game, but if you and a friend are both fans of either fighting games or The Simpsons, I think you could make a fun time out of this. I'm going to throw this one on B. Time to dust off the Wii, plug in my knockoff GameCube controller, play some Simpsons Road Rage for the GameCube. I'm not the biggest fan of driving games. I can play some Mario Kart for a couple hours or, hit me with some Cars Mater National, but they just don't really interest me that much. This game does have objectives to it though, so it's not just racing. You choose a character from the show, load up their vehicle, and drive around town doing missions for other characters in a certain time limit. It's Crazy Taxi, but with The Simpsons. In fact, it's so much like Crazy Taxi, there was even a lawsuit over it. I love The Simpsons, but just play Crazy Taxi. The only thing this game has going for it that's better than that is the character interactions, but Crazy Taxi's better in every other sense. The levels here aren't designed super well. The controlling varies from terrible to less terrible depending on what character you choose. And there's like a 50% chance you're going to end up stuck in any building you run into. I'm going to toss this one on C for Crazy Taxi. Alright, however, 2 years after the home release of Road Rage, they decided to take it mobile and port it to the Game Boy Advance. You might think that this doesn't warrant its own spot on the list, but honestly, this is an instance of the handheld port being slightly more enjoyable than the console version. Even though this doesn't really feature the character interactions you get in the home console version, the actual gameplay here is just more fun. It's the same base game idea, but it's a lot more simple than the console version, which lets you focus more on the actual gameplay. The controls feel better, they're still not great, but for a handheld racer, they get the job done without really too many complaints. So I want to put this one above the original on B. Alright, The Simpsons Skateboarding. First things first, I love skateboarding games. I grew up on the Tony Hawk series, and for the first 2 to 3 months that I owned a 360, my only game was Skate 3. But you know who else loves skateboarding? Bart Simpson. So a Simpsons skateboarding game should be a match made in heaven, right? No. This game is dog water. This is like if the Tony Hawk games had no input from Mr. Hawk himself, or any skateboarder for that matter. The level designs are boring, the controls are complete shit, you'll fall for no reason, or heaven forbid you try to do a trick on flat ground. The characters look fine, I guess, but the whole world around them just looks flat and boring. The soundtrack is just boring, generic ska music, and I'm saying that as one of the dozen people who enjoys ska music. But this game did absolutely nothing for me. Disney's Extreme Skating is a better IP skateboarding game. It's at least interesting. This is D tier. Alright, The Simpsons Hit and Run. This is less of a sequel to Road Rage and more of like a spiritual successor to it. It takes more cues from open world games, most notably Grand Theft Auto. But this game consists of driving, fighting, and destroying things, and it's an absolute blast. This game is not only great as a parody of GTA, but on its own as a game as well. It's got a fun storyline including tons of characters from the show. It's funny, not too overly difficult, but not easy to the point where you'll get bored with it. It's definitely more kid-friendly than its inspiration, but you're not playing a Simpsons game for like a hard R style experience. The graphics are definitely a bit dated, but I mean, this game is like 20 years old at this point, so why wouldn't they be? But content-wise, this game has so much going for it. The plot is a blast to play through, and when you're done with that, you can still just go around and cause havoc to your heart's content. This game is going on S tier. And last up, we have The Simpsons Game. When this game first came out, they had a lot of fun with the ads, saying it was going to come to every single console, including all the defunct ones at the time, like the 64 and even the Dreamcast. And even though it was just a joke, they did actually release this on pretty much every console that was still viable at that point. PS2, PS3, PSP, 360, the Wii, and even the DS. I had the PS2 version as a kid, but we're going to be focusing on the Wii version since that's what I currently have. First off, this is one of the easier Simpsons platformers. Sure, the space level is a pain in the ass, but it's all doable. Not a huge fan of the controls, but I just don't like using the nunchucks in general, so that might be my issue here. Also, the camera controls are pretty ass at times. But even then, the actual gameplay itself more than makes up for it. The characters are fun to play as, and you're usually switching between two of them on most levels, which keeps it really interesting. The story is basically Bart figures out that they're in a video game and uses the video game manual to find out their secret powers. Bart turns into Bartman, Lisa's saxophone disorients enemies, Homer turns into a huge ball a la Willy Wonka, and Marge can control people with a microphone. Okay. You even get to play as Maggie very briefly. I've got to say though, this is a Simpsons game done right, and that is not just a video game about The Simpsons, it's a video game parodying video games using The Simpsons. From attaining video game cliches through levels, straight up parodies of games like Mario, Sonic, and even The Sims. This game is absolutely hilarious. It has tons of surprises, and it's a blast to play through. This is one of the few where I didn't want to put it down and just played the whole thing all the way through in one go. Is this an amazing game? No. But I do think it might be the perfect Simpsons game, and this might be blasphemous, but I think I like this even more than Hit and Run, so this is going on S tier. And in front of Hit and Run. And we did it. Let me know if you agree or disagree with my choices, and let me know what you want to see me rank next. Subscribe for more rankings, and thanks for watching.